Gruber Morning Show. I'm Pete Gruber.
I'm Mark Schaffner, and welcome to the Roadster Roundtable portion of our show today.
And I'm back.
Glad to have you back.
I want to thank all of the team for carrying on for those 3 weeks that I was gone. A shout out to our service manager, Victor Vallanes, who was in a couple of
Oh, he
podcasts,
did.
right?
He hit it out of the park, man. He was so good.
Yeah.
So thank you, Victor, for being there with me.
So we've got a number of things we'll cover today. I'll update you on what happened in Austria at the Tesla takeover, what kind of Roadster involvement was included in that. We've got a few updates on the Michigan Muskegon owners event that's occurring right now. There's one Tesla Roadster there. We've got a picture of that. And the main theme of this podcast is concerns about continued Roadster support, which, of course, has been swirling for years.
Yes.
The OG Roadster has been the most troublesome car for Tesla. I think that's a safe comment to make, right?
That is too.
In fact, it nearly brought the company to bankruptcy at one point. Parts are mostly gone. Body panels, electronics are dwindling. New priorities and lack of space resulted oftentimes in parts being thrown away at Tesla. As they were growing, they looked and said, what's our future? And in order to make room for their next revenue-generating products, oftentimes the Tesla project, or the Roadster project, I should say, took a back seat. And there are actually stories of dumpsters outside the Tesla facilities full of Roadster parts. And the small parts, I'm sorry, you're going to chime in?
Do you remember hearing about not only was it parts that were thrown away, but the components that were used to make parts in many cases?
Tooling. Oh, yeah.
The tools.
Yeah, very much so. And, we can't negate the fact that this was a small production run car. It was not mainstream. It was never meant to build a company around. And, they wisely chose to go in the direction of much more sustainable cars, four-door grocery getters, as I call them.
Right.
The tooling, as you mentioned, molds, they were often discarded, or the vendors would contact Tesla and say, hey, you guys haven't bought these parts for years. We still have your molds and tools. What do you want us to do? The answer was either send them back to us or scrap them.
Yeah.
So typically in the world of manufacturing, products become obsolete, especially in the world of electronics or appliances where, things change, the technology changes, improves. And as parts inventories dry up and production lines are shut down and become dismembered, continued support becomes increasingly difficult. The manufacturers recognize this, and as the de-evolution and product goes end of life, the manufacturers typically recommend upgrading as support stops or parts disappear. And as this occurs, if the product line is large enough, aftermarket takes over.
Right.
But it's not going to happen that easily with only 2,000 cars left.
Well, right, because aftermarket is not going to see enough ROI to cover the hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars potentially that they might incur just to put together tooling.
Sure. A good example of that is a world that I was in decades ago, which was the 60s muscle cars and restorations. And there were enough of those out there in the marketplace where even though GM and Ford were no longer making parts for a 69 Plymouth Roadrunner, for example, there were enough customers out there that motivated independents and third parties to create parts. Year One was a big one at the time. Paddock was another one. And of course, a host of smaller suppliers that saw enough market to get return on investment. And that's what it's really all about. Well, that's simply not the case with the 2,000 or so Roadsters that are left. And but the reliance on Tesla for Roadster parts continues. In 2019, to address this issue, Tesla started a Roadster buyback program, spending millions to buy Roadsters for parts. This program, again, swelled parts inventories, and it did something else too, which was brilliant. In order to become good at repairing something, taking it apart is definitely a valuable process.
Sure.
And by disassembling roadsters, a lot of talent and skills were, again, recreated at the service center levels, which is typically where these buyback roadsters would go. Now, the question is it profitable for Tesla? Well, the numbers indicate otherwise. When you factor in that buying cars at market rates, storing them, and the labor to remove and retrieve parts, and then managing these parts inventories, um, in our estimation, clearly puts them underwater. So the fact that Tesla is doing this is really an act of kindness to the community.
It definitely is. I remember a conversation that you had with Elon years and years ago when we were really first getting Gruber Motors going. And you said, look, we would like to be able to do the repair for the Roadsters. We would like to take it over.
Mhm.
And his response was, it just doesn't move the needle.
Yeah, yeah. And that was during, and I remember the discussion clearly. He was in the middle of production hell, as he coined it, working on the Model 3 project.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another uh, process within Tesla that sent them close to bankruptcy. But so anyway, the the aftermarket support would improve tremendously if the cars continued their transition into collectible status with values into six figures. Now, independent shops or aftermarket suppliers or producers could justify paying the premium price for regenerating tooling, equipment, and recreating parts, even the electronics or the boards, all the engineering that's
Sure.
involved, the software issues that are involved. But unfortunately, to date, there is a glut of used roadsters for sale. And what we began to see a couple of years ago as a move toward collectible status, when roadsters moved from $30,000 to $50,000 to over $100,000 within a couple of years span, that has begun to unravel as more roadsters are for sale currently than ever before. Um, and part of the reasons for that is, well, there are a number of reasons. We'll get into that. I've got another section here that we can go into that in greater detail. But the cars currently have deferred maintenance, and service options are somewhat limited compared to what they used to be. The savior of the OG Roadster, or the original Roadster, may just be the second generation Roadster that's due to be released soon. And the basic reason for that is our take has always been that it would be very difficult for Tesla to sell these $250,000 cars if potential buyers were concerned about support being drying up at some point in the future, just like the OG Roadsters.
I think that's a great point, too, because putting the other Roadster into a higher price bracket will attract more of the market that I think they're trying to pursue. It's a small market for the super sports cars, but it is out there, and it gives an additional bump in status to those people that own the original Roadster.
Mhm. I've got a chart here that we can throw up, Jesse. It is, find it here. All right, service centers. What we did a year or so ago was there was a lot of question about the regionalization of Roadster service. And in fact, our caption here on our background says, who's going to service these cars in the future? Well, the, the amount of regionalization where they were consolidating service centers that were capable or eligible of accepting Roadsters was changing rapidly. And no one really knew, which service centers were able to take on a Roadster.
Sure.
So we did a poll, and this is mostly owner-based information. We're still waiting for Tesla to give us an update. And I've got a part of that under Europe. While I was in Europe the last 3 weeks, I spent some time with Tesla Europe there, especially the Roadster faction. And what you see there under Europe is an expansion of the Europe service centers that are now eligible or capable of handling a Roadster, not only service, but also the battery swaps, the 3.0 battery swaps. I've been working with Tesla North America to figure out precisely what service centers or any expansion in the North American space. But on the left there, you can see the USA service centers. So this should be updated soon. For those of you that want to see this updated list, it's available on a Facebook site under Tesla Roadster Owners Group. And feel free to join if you own a Roadster. The original intent of the group was Tesla Roadster owners only. We've expanded that since to Tesla employees or ex-employees, anyone essentially that has the ability to provide inputs into the Roadster project and provide support,
Yes, very true.
even tech support. So the service center locations that are capable of taking on Roadsters will expand. It's frustrating, and I'll give you an example. There was a customer in the Southeast that used to take his Roadster 15 miles away from his house to a service center.
Yeah.
He showed up a couple of years ago, and they said, well, we don't do Roadsters here anymore. You have to go 200 miles north. And, what we're trying to do with this list is avoid those unexpected occurrences so that people know where they can take their Roadsters to have them serviced. If anyone is frustrated about the fact that this is occurring, it's a natural progression. The service center skills are changing. They're working on the later model cars. There is attrition that is occurring. The original people that were knowledgeable on Roadsters oftentimes have left or are retiring or are leaving. And my take on it is why would you want to take your Roadster to a service center that no longer has the heavy-duty skills to work on your Roadster?
Oh, absolutely. While it's more inconvenient to have to travel a longer distance, it's more comforting to know that if you're going to travel that longer distance, you're going to get good expertise.
Yep. On the bright side, Tesla is still continuing to train Roadster capabilities and skills. That was reinforced in Europe. Same thing is happening there. They have not given up on the Tesla Roadster, and there appear to be no plans to do so. We also help out with that. As we see aging issues in our service center, and we work on so many Roadsters, it's inevitable that we're going to get new information. We share that with the Tesla service centers, and we keep them updated as to what the latest issues we're finding with the Roadsters are. The support for independents like us out here in the repair space continues to improve. Tesla earlier this year open sourced all of the Roadster documentation.
Yes.
Which we immediately put into AI. And we have a Roadster GPT that has been very successful in our service center. And we also are continuing to get Tesla Roadster parts requests. The years that we've been repairing Roadster, we found that many times we have to recreate parts because the original vendors are gone. Tesla no longer has the parts. And to try to get a new vendor to make the parts requires tooling. So we've become somewhat creative in that process. Some of the parts that we remake for the PEM, for example, is 3D printed, which is a much lower cost than trying to get tooling or molds created for these parts. Tesla is continuing to come to us for parts like this to recreate and to keep them supplied. So let's get into another topic here. Why are there so many Roadsters for sale? And that topic comes up often. There was one recently on a Facebook site where that very question was posed. Well, the number one reason that we find is health issues. Sometimes the owners can no longer get in and out of the car to do the Roadster wiggle, as they call it.
Yeah, when you're 55 years old and you've kind of made it wealth-wise, the Roadster was a fun investment. Now you're 75, 73, 74 years old. Maybe you've had a hip replacement. Maybe you have back issues. Happens, and it's been happening. Those are That's a general example, but it is reflected in real stories.
The number two reason that we see, oftentimes widows are selling the cars or the family is
Yeah.
selling the cars. Again, like Mark pointed out, the people that were buying these cars 16 years ago was not your average starting a family type, owner. They had other priorities. It was people with disposable income that wanted a fun toy to drive around on the weekends,
Yeah.
and that was typically a certain age group. And 16 years later, that age group is finding, or we're finding that it's difficult to find them, basically.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Three, local close to house service options are declining. It's like that customer in the Southeast. Um, in order to get a Roadster to have major service done these days, is either going to be at a Tesla service center, which may be a few hundred miles away for a 3.0 battery swap,
Mm-hmm.
or the type of work that we do, repairing the electronics. And it requires a transport to a location, which is nowhere as inexpensive as driving it 15 miles from your house to a service center.
Exactly. And the cost of transports, goodness, what are they? Twice as much as they were just 2 years ago?
Yeah, yeah. One of the interesting things about transport, and I'll insert that being in Europe, a lot of the large trucks on the Autobahn we noticed were from the Eastern European countries, Poland, Estonia, Czechoslovakia. And I asked my brother, I said, what's that all about? He said, it's because of labor rates. The truckers in those countries don't demand as high a wage. So typically that's where the business tends to fluctuate to.
Okay.
And, we find the same thing here in the States when we have roadsters showing up. I about 90% of the time I detect an accent. And because I'm a foreigner myself, I usually ask, what is that accent I detect? And it's typically Eastern European, a lot of Ukrainian drivers, Russian drivers, and then, of course, the Eastern European countries that used to be part of the Soviet bloc.
Sure.
But anyway, little a deviation there, but an interesting tidbit of information. Then there's deferred maintenance in the cars. Well, it keeps on increasing as cars age. It doesn't get better. Suspension issues. I don't think there's a Roadster out there that has a decent suspension in it anymore because they decline whether they sit or whether you drive them. Definitely more, pronounced if you're driving the car, but you've got rubber bushings that are drying up and cracking and wearing out just from sitting.
Well, you don't have to look at EVs to know that you're not going to be able to have a pair of shocks sit on your car for 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
Or 10 years, really, for that matter.
Mm-hmm. We have a good video out there about our shock rebuilder that gave us a deep dive lesson into what happens to shock absorbers. There's oil in there. Deteriorates with age. It gums up bearing bushings and seals. So, and then you have an ESS pack, which is going to need replacement. It used to be $29,000 plus tax. We knew that Tesla was underwater making them for that price. They raised the price to $40,000 in October of last year. And with tax, it's $45K.
Yeah.
So those are all things that are weighing on Roadster owners. And then finally, you have this glut that currently exists that has reduced the valuation on what you can get for a functioning Roadster. And that's also playing into, people wanting to get rid of their cars.
Simple supply and demand.
So here's an interesting post that we found that really was somewhat attacking our matchmaking site, which I find is a very generous offer on our part, considering it's free, completely free, compared to the auction houses that you can go to, or even eBay, who's going to take a commission on a sale. And it went something like this. The first statement is absolutely on target true. There are more Roadsters for sale today than there were at any time in history, which has created a buyer's market.
I definitely agree with that part of it.
Fully agree with that. Then it goes on. I said months ago that someone wanting to be a matchmaker was going to ruin the market.
We'll get to that in a minute. I happen to disagree with that one.
And then he said, we need to collectively stop this from making our cars $50,000 cars. Well, That is like saying a dating service is responsible for creating more single people. It's also a dating let's take a look at this. A dating service simply connects individuals looking for relationships, and our car matchmaking service connects buyers and sellers who are already in the market.
Right.
They're going to sell their cars whether we're there or not. We don't create the cars or the demand. We just help people find the perfect match.
You know, the theory that is being proposed by the other contributor, while it might seem sound on the surface, you've got supply and you've got demand.
Yeah.
Reduce the supply. If the demand stays the same, the price goes up. Okay, that makes sense. The problem is that if you don't control the entire supply, in other words, control who buys roadsters or who sells roadsters, and all 2,000 people that have roadsters, who sells them, and when they're allowed to sell them, it won't work.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, in the United States, if you're controlling a market like that, then that's a monopoly, and that's not legal. The other way to approach the supply and demand question is to look at the demand. Do everything that you can to increase demand, which typically means getting the word out about what roadsters are for sale, making sure as many people as possible know about those roadsters. And that's what our matchmaking site is doing. It's generating demand for roadsters.
Mm-hmm.
Especially with a universe of 2,000 cars, it's going to be a limited supply. At some point, that demand, if it stays up, is going to exhaust what supply there is, and that supply will eventually get into a little more equilibrium, and the demand will go up, the prices will go up.
Sure. And you know, part of what the matchmaking service does is we have 450 pre-qualified Tesla Roadster buyers on a list
Right.
that are looking for cars, and we add to that every week.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we are promoting demand. We're making them visible. We're creating buyers for the cars as a result.
Right. And by building demand, generating or manufacturing demand like that, you don't have to control anything.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to restrict supply, you have to control the supply in order to restrict it. By simply building demand, anybody can participate, and there's nothing illegal about trying to build demand. That's what these new markets are all about, is building demand.
Right. So that's our take on the attack on our Tesla Roadster matchmaking site. We'd love to hear from you, by the way, if anybody has any comments. It looks like we've got Instagram coming in. Michael Allen Novar, he says, that's crazy. Well, I agree.
Yeah. Well, and I know he was talking about earlier with the roadsters aging and everything else, but that applies just as well to this comment too.
It does. Have another update for you. If we can bring up a picture called Marco Pack. There are a number of people working around the world actually on a replacement Tesla Roadster battery pack. And we're all waiting for one to come along and say, okay, I've got a finished product, gone through validation testing. Here's the solid price for this pack. Here's how you can order, process this thing. And it looks like Marco Nolte in Germany may be the first one. This is a picture of his test mule Roadster. And he has said on Facebook, the first Roadster aftermarket battery is successfully commissioned in its almost production state. But you know what? I just realized my computer went dead.
Let me continue reading through this while you get your computer settled. There's still some details, Marco says, that need to be tweaked, but overall, it's just minor changes that will be necessary. There will be some more packs that they build this year. In his changelog, Marco says, this is one completely new, there is one pack that's completely redesigned for easier manufacturing. And he added back water cooling, and it's mounted on the original Roadster enclosure. He says it's hard to get the pack to operating temperature, but thankfully it is performing much better than the original pack. In fact, even at lower temps, it performs better than the original pack. So the final version is designed into the original battery enclosure. I thought that was interesting. He was trying to manufacture his own enclosure. Now he says it's going into the original one.
It's integrating back into the pack. Yeah, that was a question that was posed.
Yeah.
Um,
And he says it's sheet metal parts only. No welding is needed anymore, so it's cheaper and faster to produce. It still plugs into the ESS internal wiring harness and uses the Model S DC to DC converter. He said, but that's optional because it does also work with the original Roadster APS. I thought that was potentially going to be one of his biggest selling points too, because we've had so much trouble trying to repair these Roadster APS units.
mhm.
If we can get that Tesla Model S DC to DC converter to work inside of a new pack, well, Model S DC to DC converters are easily, you can find them easily, and they're out on the market.
And if you're watching, Marco, we thought that was brilliant because the original Martech and Delta DC to DC converters, or what they called APS units in the
Yeah.
ESS pack, were problematic. There's limited documentation available. We finally made some inroads into getting documentation for the Delta unit, although the final comeback was, we have it, we just have to find it now. Right?
Have they found it yet? Do you know?
Not yet. Well, not since I've been back. but
Yeah,
I'll certainly
I
look
haven't
into
found.
that.
I haven't heard anything about that. And on the Martech, I think that one was manufactured specifically to not be repaired.
Exactly. Yes, it's an archaeological dig to get at any of the components because of all the thermal potting
Yeah.
compound.
So, but he says basically the pack is fine as is. So he's got the pack in, it's running, it's not throwing errors anymore, and it's test driving successfully with its mule. He says, but I want to improve the cooling for a simpler assembly once more. So the cooling process is going to get another review.
hmm
So if you want to take over from there.
Sure. By the way, one of the reasons that my computer went down, we've improved our production quality here in the studio. We've got new lights. One of these days, we're going to show you everything that's in this studio. And apparently, my power cord or power supply for my laptop did not get plugged into a good outlet. So my battery ran down unexpectedly. But anyway, I'm back online. I've got it working.
There we go.
Did you mention that Marco's pack is 330 pounds lighter?
No, that's just what we're getting to.
Okay. Because he says option B is his favorite, but the deal isn't through yet. It would be a 53 kW pack with approximately 150 kilograms lighter than the original ESS. By the way, I had to redo my thinking being in Europe. Everything is kilograms.
Oh,
I
sure.
had no idea what that meant, Even the currencies are a bit weird. You've got the euro everywhere, and you're constantly doing, well, now, how much is that in dollars?
Yes, yes.
So that's 330 pounds lighter. We all suspected that if you take 300 pounds out of a Tesla Roadster, you're going to see a performance increase.
I think you will too.
Yeah. So anyway, he is on his way with this. What else does he say here? The price should be around $30,000. And remember, Tesla's $40,000 plus tax. Now, Marco's going to have to charge tax. This isn't going to be one of those,
Yeah.
on the side deals because he's got a valid business here that he's creating with this. But so far, it looks like he's got a product, and he's going to keep us updated as to how he's doing with this pack.
I'm pretty excited to see how this will potentially go forward because, dang, $30,000 is 25% decrease in cost.
Mhm.
I think there's going to be a lot of interest out there.
There is, yes. We've got an update on the NACS conversion for the Roadster. Remember, we've been working on a conversion that takes the proprietary Tesla plug and socket that is only used on Roadsters and converting that to the more popular NACS standard that all the other car manufacturers are going to. We got a hold of the original manufacturer of the high voltage cables, the pigtails in the car, and the charge cord plugs. And they've been working on it for the last 2.5, 3 months or so. And when I got back from Europe, I contacted them and I said, I haven't heard, but what's the latest on this next project? Well, here's where we're at right now. They said, we apologize for the quote delay. We got an unexpected hiccup to produce the old Tesla inlets since a supplier of one of the subcomponents closed business, and we are working to understand how to overcome the small volume production. So, what it sounds like is on the Tesla Roadster, there's some metal plates with the socket.
Hmm.
The vendor that was apparently machining one of those parts is out of business. Well, I'm going to contact them today. We have a machine shop here. We have the capability, programmable CNC machines, laser cutting machines. We can make the part that they need. So it's not dead, it's just slightly delayed. And I think the community is going to enjoy having a updated socket on their Roadster that they can use right along with their other Tesla vehicles, or in this case now, because the world has adopted all of the EVs.
Well, and I don't think that's just your opinion. The amount of interest that we've received every time after we mention this,
Mhm.
it validates that. I'm sure there's a lot of interest out there. So I'm also anxious to see how that turns out.
And of course, it is not going to include supercharging. That is going to require changes in the power electronics module to be able to have it accept a DC input. But that's the next phase of this. At this point, we're just getting focused on trying to do the connector conversion.
We have one comment on Instagram here from EV Smoke ATX. Says, you guys are amazing here for what you do. Thank you very much. It's definitely a love and passion project that we do. It's not something we're really getting paid for. And it's something that we really enjoy doing as well.
Totally agree. Jesse, got another picture, yellow cable comparison. Um, I know that we've talked about this before, but it keeps coming up. There was a Facebook post again within the last week, and the customer says, does anybody know where I can buy a charge cable for my Roadster? And she was talking about the yellow charge cable, the one that you see here. Well, they're not being produced anymore. And until we get the NACS project going, which part of which is recreating that connector, proprietary connector, we're not going to be able to build any new old style cables, although that is another goal. In the meantime, though, remember that any of these charge cables are repairable, 100% repairable. If you try to buy one, you're just going to get frustrated because either somebody's going to pipe up and say, oh, I got an old one here, and
Yeah.
private message me and we'll work out a deal, or not find it at all. What we're able to do is rebuild these, and they're quite rebuildable, and enhance them. The original cable has a 12-foot long cord. Ours is a 25-foot long cord. The original one is a 12-gauge wire, which is only good for 20 amps. Ours is good for 30 amps because we use 10-gauge wire. And we take that problematic GFI plug, that big clunky thing that you see there, which is, by the way, where 90% of the failures in that cable occur, and we get rid of it. We have a molded plug on the end of ours, and we completely eliminate that GFI plug. So you end up with a much better product. You end up with a product that you don't need an extension cord with, and you end up with a product that gives you more length, 25 feet, to wherever your outlet is. They are available. They're on our e-store. And I'm amazed at how many of these we are retrofitting every week. I'd say at least one or two a week come in these days.
Wow. It's been a hugely popular product ever since we introduced it. It's a better product, bottom line. You don't see the voltage dip that Roadsters are infamous for when you try to connect another extension cord to that GFI plug. And that's simply because it's a heavier duty cable with the ability to take on the better electricity with no voltage drop.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another picture to pop up, Jesse. It's called Dirty Drive Motor. And this one is from a long-time Tesla Roadster owner community member, Ed Ma, up in Canada. And if you're watching, Ed, how are you? Hope everything's going well. He chimed in, and the topic on Facebook was, I'm getting overheating type alerts and power limiting. And the first question was, when is the last time you had an annual preventive maintenance done? Well, this is a picture of the drive motor. The drive motor is supposed to be cleaned out during annual preventive maintenance, but it doesn't always happen.
Hmm.
And here's a good justification as to why this is important. All of those leaves, twigs, debris, dust bunnies that you see there are in a heat sink type aluminum ring that is designed to transfer heat away from the drive motor and dissipate it passively. When it gets this badly gummed up, your drive motor is going to run hotter than it should. And there are sensors that will give you a warning that you're overheating and that it's going to limit power. So, again, I'm showing you this picture to reinforce the importance of your annual preventive maintenance. And that word annual, by the way, is only if you do modest, moderate driving. You know, take it out on the weekends. If it's a daily driver or you live on a country dirt road, your annuals probably need to be done every 3 to 6 months.
Right.
So thank you, Ed, for posting that picture. That's probably the worst example that we've seen. So we've got another picture here, 1188-1, Jesse. This is a local Phoenix Roadster that comes in periodically to get his annuals done primarily and occasionally some service work. And what you'll see here is a black Roadster with wheel protectors. He put those on before we had Alligator product, which is the curb rash preventer. And he actually had that decal made custom before there was product available, which we now have on our e-store, by the way. But the reason I'm showing you this Roadster is this is the highest mileage Arizona Roadster that we're aware of. It actually has 120,962 miles on the odometer. And we've been carefully observing this Roadster to see how it moves toward end of life, because no one really knows yet how a Tesla Roadster is going to go end of life and die eventually, where the battery needs to be replaced.
Right.
The only indication we have is the flawed 2016 replacement packs that were inserted from 2015 onward that are showing an impedance problem with the cells and a loss of power.
Mm-hmm.
But the OG packs or the legacy packs, for the most part, unless they've been bricked, abused in some way, are typically running strong. And we're carefully watching this Roadster to see how it moves toward end of life, because this is probably going to be one of the first ones that we're going to see.
Yeah, because this particular Roadster at nearly 121,000 miles has more miles on it than any other Roadster we've seen come through our shop.
If we can pop up another picture, Jesse, this one's called 1188-Charge. And this one shows you the maximum charge that this Roadster is charging to. Now, before that comes up, you may ask, well, why is the mileage so high on this car? Is it a daily driver? This customer actually leases out his Roadster to Turo. So it gets more mileage than your average weekend warrior Roadster would get. But we did a standard mode charge, which is the 80%, and it only goes to 104 miles, the ideal range. Well, the next question in the Roadster world is going to be, what's the CAC on a car with 121,000 miles and it only charges to 104 miles? Well, that's the next image, Jesse. If you can pop up 1188-CAC, it is 87 is what the CAC goes to. And the reason this is significant for us is we're watching to see how a Roadster is going to move to end of life and if there are any performance issues.
Right.
This car does not yet have any kind of loss of power issues, even with a CAC of 87. So it's going to be interesting to watch this thing move through time. And we'll keep you updated. In the meantime, it is getting a suspension upgrade. And, of course, it's the standard annual preventive maintenance.
And, of course, if it's being used on Turo, that suspension upgrade is going to make it ride much smoother. It's worth a few extra dollars for every rental.
Yep. Another image here, Jesse, Michigan Event Roadster. There is a owners event that's currently taking place in Muskegon, Michigan. A number of EV influencers are there. John Stringer, Brian, the bearded Tesla guy,
Hmm.
and some other people are there as well. It's not as large as the Tesla takeover was here in the U.S. in San Luis Obispo last year, or the Flachau event in Austria. By the way, the numbers there were toward the end of the session there, they had sold 1,200 tickets plus, and I don't know what the plus is. There were 270 cars there, including a Cybertruck and two Tesla Roadsters.
That's just
And I have a bit more information for you there as we move along in this podcast here. But that Roadster that you saw there is in Michigan. It is VIN number 648. And whenever we become aware of a Roadster VIN, we look at the Roadster registry. It turns out that this one is not in the registry. So for any of you watching, make sure you tell the owner there's a registry that they can send information to, and we'll be able to insert it. The reason that we feel it's important for owners to register their cars in the Roadster registry, it's on our website, by the way. There's a little icon there. Tesla needs to know how many Roadster owners are out there and how many are functioning in order to make any kind of predictions about how much service they need to continue. So
Yes.
the more, the better.
yes, because we know from our experience before we put our census program out there, Tesla just thought there weren't really any Roadsters out there, and they were planning on winding it down.
There weren't that many, that's right. Another image here, which is Michigan event Cybertruck. One of the influencers that's there is Sandy Munro. And Sandy brought his Cybertruck. There's an interview with John Stringer and him. If you're interested, you'll probably find it on social media. But you can see it's fairly well attended, but certainly not as large as some of these Tesla takeover events. All right, so how large was Austria? Well, let me tell you. 270 cars, two Roadsters. Both Roadsters were Fusion Red. One was an Austrian Roadster.
Mhm.
One drove up all the way from Italy. The one from Italy belonged to the president of the Italian Tesla Club, Luca Delbo, and VIN 727 is his Fusion Red Roadster. And he came to this first ever European Austrian Tesla takeover event. And he was kind enough to give me the keys to his Roadster. And I realized that I have never driven a Tesla Roadster in Europe before. So this was a first
That
for
had
me.
to be a cool experience.
And I drove it around Flachau there in the valley there with the Alps on both sides. This event, by the way, resulted in an epic light show. And there were 270 cars participating. If you're interested in what it was like, on our YouTube channel, we've got a couple of videos. One of them is the presentation that I gave at this takeover event. And I was really the only one talking Tesla Roadster. I felt it was important, since everyone is focused on the future of Tesla, to remind people how Tesla got started. That it was really the Roadster that created the company. And so anyway, we've done 2 podcasts, so I don't remember what I've already talked about and what I haven't, but I'm going to do my best here, so if I'm repeating myself, that's the reason. I started off with a question. What if the Tesla Roadster hadn't made it? And that was probable at the time because, remember, they were close to bankruptcy
Yes.
a number of times. And if Tesla didn't make it, how long would it have taken for the EV revolution to start? And then finally, who would have started it? Remember, the car companies back then, GM and all the rest, didn't think that EVs were viable. In fact, that's why GM crushed all the EV ones and said there's no future in electric cars.
You know, I know I said this in the last podcast too. It took somebody who was a visionary like Elon Musk. You had said he was persistent. The persistence was the key thing, and you're right. He ignored the advisors. He ignored the accountants who said there's no more ROI in this. And he said, no, I saw those people crying over their EV1s being crushed. I know that there's a market.
And he pulled a Stephen Jobs. He created his own reality, I think.
I think he did.
So the two roadsters that were at this event in Austria were VIN 727 and a Austrian roadster, which is a validation prototype, VIN 26. And I've got that here somewhere in my notes. I can find that. So they were grateful to have at least a couple of roadsters there. And there it is, validation prototype number 26, also Fusion Red, Austrian car. These days, you're hard-pressed to find roadsters at these events. And I think Austria was very grateful that at least two of them showed up. In Michigan right now, there is one. Don't know whether any other clubs or roadster owners are going to attend the event and swell that to more than one, but that would be nice. Based on the overwhelming success of this first European Tesla takeover, it looks like this is going to become a yearly event. The next takeover event happens in July, and that's going to be in San Luis Obispo. And the guest speaker there, at least one of them, is going to be Franz von Holzhausen, the lead designer at Tesla. And I can't remember the other gentleman's name, but he's an astronaut. So they've got a couple of people there that you may want to go see. All right, let's see if there's anything else here.
I think we're about ready to wrap this show up, actually.
Okay. All right. And as always, we appreciate you joining us for these Roadster podcasts or the EV podcast, which occurs just before this one at 10 o'clock. This one's at 11 o'clock. And we will keep you updated on some of these events occurring with the Tesla Roadster.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. Have a great week.